As a teacher in the New York City Police Academy, what do you think were some of the major causes for these riots?
Well, first of all, our city ranks very low in terms of being advanced. Our municipal services, on the whole, have failed to keep pace with rises in population. Most residents lack sewers, and the pipes that exist are poorly constructed and constantly clogged. The food people eat is filthy, with many merchants selling poisoned stock, such as milk from diseased cattle or coffee, with street sweepings. Epidemics regularly sweep through the tenements, giving us the highest death rate of any city in the civilized world. These problems in our city are too large for our small police force to effectively handle. However, at the heart of why the city was so susceptible to these riots is because of the most important thing in the world: money. New York City is often considered the southernmost city in the north because our economy is unfortunately completely connected to the slave and, in my opinion, businessmen insuring and financing southern products and slaves. Therefore, our entire economy has a complete interest in maintaining slavery and helping the southern traders.
Do you think the New York City Police Department was properly equipped to handle the situation?
Well, I think we were undermined by the political situation. The fact that the rich men in the city, and through them the men they elected as leaders, we were not only, during the riots, outnumbered by the rioters, but also outvoted. What happened was that, as might be expected, anti-war sentiment carried a new governor, Horatio Seymour, into office a few months ago. And in my opinion, this anti-war feeling in our leadership helped forge the riots. The police followed the orders of Mayor George Opdyke, a good Republican, but he was forced to back down by his boss, the governor, who, again, was elected by those against the war. The power in New York State was run from a pro-South perspective, therefore. However, the governor was forced to back down to the good President Lincoln, savior of our Union, who at that moment desperately needed troops to fight the invading rebels in Pennsylvania. Although I do not blame the president for what happened next, the resulting exodus of most of our troops from our city left us in an incendiary situation. The civilian police force was completely unprepared and outnumbered to face the huge bombs of draft dodgers about to confront us.
In your opinion, what caused you and the Irish community to revolt on such magnitude?
Well, I think that the answer to that question lies in the background of the Irish community in America. The potato famine in Ireland and the enclosure movement was making it hard for my family to survive. Our farm got cut in half by the enclosure movement, and then the famine killed our potatoes. We came to the United States with the promise of leading a good and better life, which turned out to be false. Instead of living the American dream, we found misery and overcrowded slums. Not to say life back near Dublin was much better, but the wonderful picture of a city filled with opportunity and money was a lie. That opportunity and money was only there for those born into it. The majority of us lived in the 5 points, which one could equate to be like living in humps of dirt and disease. Life was just so hard. Living space was nowhere to be found. My family of 7 shared a 2-room apartment with another family of 7. The walls were falling, the beams were breaking, and every night a murder happened right outside our window. Also, all the New Yorkers thought we were going to steal their jobs. I will admit that us Irishmen would work for less money than them because we needed the money, but then we had a problem. Those damned free Negroes were working for less money than we were. Those Negroes were the only thing us Irishmen and Protestants in New York could agree on. They're just a bunch of filth. So when Lincoln issued his Emancipation Proclamation, the war went from fighting to protect a nation to fighting to free those damn Negroes. Why on earth would we ever fight so those Negroes could come up here and steal our jobs? It's cut and dry. These hard living conditions and the freeing of the Negroes were just too much for us to handle. When someone told us that we were going to be forced to fight to free those creatures, we had just had enough. On top of all of this, the buyout in the draft was just injustice at its finest. The $300 price of exemption proved to too many of us that we were being exploited by the rich Republican abolitionists.
As an immigrant, What is your outlook on New York City's social structure?
New York is not a melting pot of cultures and races. Rather, New York is an assorted stew of races, nationalities, religions, and economic classes which do not blend and do not get along. We rioted for our rights, to not be beaten down by the rich man and to be stomped on and left in the dust by the Negro. Recently, in response to the riots, new reforms were made in order to establish better living conditions and to improve the quality of living in the city. The city's rich finally understood they could no longer walk upon us immigrants. The city even paid for most of the peasants' $300 exemption fee to avoid the draft. Now, with most of the Negroes gone, hopefully New York can become a melting pot of cultures and classes. Please explain the devastation that the draft riots have imposed upon you.
Well, over 2/3 of all Manhattan residents have been born outside the United States, while the majority is Irish or German, the two nationalities that oppose colored people the most. Because of their hatred for African Americans, over 4 days, beginning July 13, 1863, over 119 people were killed. Millions of dollars in property were damaged, and over 3,000 people were left homeless. The poet Walt Whitman described the draft riot saying, "It seems the passions of the people were only sleeping and burst forth with a terrible fury." Even though my family hasn't been directly affected by the riots, we live in constant fear of an attack. Like I posted on Facebook, my neighbor was hanged by an Irishman. My community has been oppressed by these riots, and I pray that the conditions will pass. Things are looking bad right now, as over 3,000 of my African American brothers are homeless due to Irish and German attacks. Now, my community just seeks help from the government. Mayor Opdyke has just called the Secretary of War for military soldiers to patrol Manhattan, and hopefully this will end the riots. But until then, my family can only pray for safety.
How did these riots affect Abraham Lincoln's presidency and the overall Civil War?
During Abraham Lincoln's inaugural address, he stated, "We are not enemies, but friends. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection." Our president supports the black community, and in the Emancipation Proclamation, which was passed earlier this year, 3.1 million slaves were declared free in the South. As a result, before the riots began, I had a positive outlook on the future of the Civil War. I expected the conflict to end soon, and for my family to live without racial tensions. However, the draft riots in Manhattan have relapsed the Civil War to its previous state of hostility. Now, I can only hope that Abraham Lincoln runs for presidency with a strong platform in opposition to slavery and concludes the Civil War. This would break the racial barriers that leave my community of African Americans in constant fear of attacks. Since the draft riots, the number of African Americans in New York City has declined to 9,945, only 1.5% of the population. The draft riots have been the bloodiest fight over civil rights and slavery in our country's history. And although this might sound crazy, I believe that the draft riots will help in the fight against slavery. The rich have now learned that they cannot ignore the demands of the black community, so they need to pay attention to us. In addition, reforms were made, including the tenement house laws, which limited the amount of people in a specific area and required for each room to have proper ventilation and a fire escape. Even more importantly, the police force is beginning to crack down on rioters, and the Irish and German protesters are learning how to make their voices heard in a peaceful way, through politics. Tammany Hall, the equivalent of a modern-day political party, grew significantly, incorporating Irishmen and other immigrants into its base.